All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed that last video about the unboxing of the new open road Panther 3S 13,500 pound winch. And as I said in that video, I wanted to make a video of what you should be looking for in a winch when you go to buy one, so that you're not spending money you don't need or getting something you're not aware of how it works, because there are particular things you need to keep in mind when you are selecting a winch. It goes for all recovery stuff, because when you are off-road and you're trying to recover somebody, it's one of the most dangerous situations that you can possibly be in if someone is truly stuck. If they're falling over a ledge, if they're stuck in a mud hole, if they are in a rut, or even trying to get up over a rock. Depending on what the terrain is and where you are, it can be one of the most dangerous things you can possibly do. So I want to give you at least the basics of the winch. And then later on, we'll probably talk about things like this: snatch ropes and D-rings or D-shackles, soft shackles, and then max tracks or recovery pads, or however you want to put them. These are not max tracks. These are something that I have had for years, and they were super cheap. I don't even know where they came from. Some dude had them on his Jeep. He never used them. He sold them to me for like 60 bucks, and I've had them for 12 years. Using a couple times, not a lot. Yeah, they're there. But we'll talk about those things later on too when it comes to recovery equipment in general. Today's video is all about the winch. So stay tuned, stick around, and we'll see you on the other side of this short clip. Let's get into talking about things that you need to know if you're going to be adding a winch of any sort to your rig. Number one, first thing to know is that when you are choosing the weight load rating of your winch, you need not only consider what your vehicle weighs empty, but what it weighs when it's loaded, plus the additional strain of you trying to pull it out of whatever mud hole or rock that you've landed it on, or rut that you've buried it in. So it's not just, okay, I have a 6,000 pound truck, so I'm gonna get a 6,000 pound winch. You have to go up and above that. And the rule of thumb is 1.5 to 2 times the gross vehicle weight of your rig. So if you have a 6,000 pound truck, then you're probably going to need a 9,000 to 12,000 pound winch for that, depending on how much weight you're going to put on it and the kind of things you expect to get stuck in. Now, hearing that, you might think that bigger is better. However, it's not always the case. Generally, when you get into the bigger winches of a certain brand, the bigger winches are all basically going to have the same motor, and they're just going to have different gear ratios. And so just like when you go into 4 low with your vehicle, you have more torque but less speed. So if you keep going up in weight rating of your winch, likelihood is that it's going to be slower than the winch below it. And so you want to just actually calculate what your vehicle weighs so that you get the proper winch, so you have the best balance of speed to strength. If you don't need a 13,000 or 14,000 pound winch, then don't get it. Find the one that fits in that 1.5 to 2 times ratio, and you'll be fine. So in my case, with the 2011 Ford Expedition 4-wheel drive short wheelbase, which is what I have, Google tells me that my curb weight is about 5,900 or 5,500, depending on where you look, if you had the wrong thing. Now, Google's AI can give you all kinds of random things, and generally they're wrong, so I wouldn't go by that. My door sticker says that my gross vehicle weight, which is the total weight of the vehicle itself, which is its curb weight, plus its full payload, is about 7,500 pounds. So that's what you really need to pay attention to when you're thinking about buying a winch, because if you load down your vehicle with camping gear and people and all this other stuff, you're going to be close to that gross vehicle weight rating. You want to be able to pull out of a ditch a vehicle loaded to its payload capacity. And you may not always run that weight, but it's always good to have. Now, as I said, I found my gross vehicle weight rating on my door sticker. If you don't know where that is, I'm going to show you right here. It's fairly easy to find. You just go out here, open your driver door, and then you're going to find it down here on this little door jamb. It'll be somewhere in the driver side door jamb. and you'll see different things there. You'll see the gross vehicle weight rating. You'll see your tire pressure, what the original tires were, and some other stuff that's there that you might need, you probably don't need, but some other safety stuff as well. But that's where you're gonna find your vehicle's gross weight rating, and that, in my opinion, is how you should pick which winch to go with. And in my case, as I said, 7,500 pounds, that's almost 4 tons, so that's a chunky boy, and I needed the 13.5, which puts me somewhere in the middle of that ratio we talked about earlier. So it's not quite 1.5, and it's not quite 2, because 2 would be 15,000 pounds, and I think 1.5 is 11,250 or something like that. But I felt safe doing, you know, this at the 13.5, and for the price point I got it at, I think it'll be great as long as it works right, and I'm fairly confident that it will. Now, since we're reviewing the open road winches, I'm going to show you how I was actually wrong with half of the stuff I just said. On their site, they have these listed, the 10,000, the 12,000, the 13.5. They have them listed as having the first two having the same horsepower and the last one having more. They have 6, 6, and then 6.6, right? So that's what they have written down. And that's the headline on the ad page. But if you actually go in their specs, they have almost the same thing. And their motors do change in how they output power, because the gear ratio is actually exactly the same, which is opposite what I just said. So in their case, their gear ratios are all 2:18:1, but their motors are rated at 6.2 for the 10,000 pounds, 6.5 for the 12,000, and it's 6.6 for the 13.5, which is 4.6 kilowatts, 4.8 kilowatts, and 5.0 kilowatts respectively. So in their case, what they advertise on the front page isn't exactly right, but what's on the spec page shows us that the motor actually does change. Now, I would doubt that the motor is actually different. It's probably a capacitor or something that allows more power to go to it. I have no idea. We'll have to find out if it burns up or if it blows up. But gear ratio in this case of the open road is exactly the same across the board. So you can make of that what you will. Now, the rope and cable weight, or the rope and cable, should be rated to that specific weight no matter what. So that should be peace of mind for that. Now, when installing your winch, it's kind of split 50-50 across the internet whether you should install a disconnect or an interrupter between your battery and the winch itself. And essentially what that does is it cuts the power to the winch, so it's not powered all the time. So it's only powered when you want it on, and it's not powered when you don't need it. And the arguments for that happening is that you can get in a fire if you have a front end crash, or if you're in the middle of a long pole and you do something wrong, something comes loose, you have a loose connection, you might possibly catch on fire on those connections, because a winch can pull for between 100 to 400-ish, somewhere around there, amps while it's fully loaded. And if that's the case, that's a lot of amperage. If there's something that's arcing or it's not connected properly, you can get a fire, which, side note, you should always, always, always carry a fire extinguisher that is rated for vehicle fires. And in fact, I would suggest having 2 of them, one in the front, one in the back, especially if you intend on being off-road or way out in the middle of nowhere, because you want to stop a fire no matter where it's at, as soon as you can. And if you plan to cook, I would also have a fire extinguisher rated for grease fires, because generally you're gonna have grease involved somehow, some way. Now, if you do choose to install an interrupter or a solenoid, you want to make sure that it is as close to the battery as possible, because essentially what you have is an unfused link coming from your motor to the switch. So you don't want there to be a very long line between that and the disconnect. You want to disconnect as close to the battery as possible. And as I said, you can use a solenoid too. If you use a solenoid, then you would wire it up and then wire a switch to the inside of your cab, which would be easier, because if you do a disconnect switch, it's probably going to be under your hood. And if you went into something in the water, you're going to have to get out of your truck, go through the water, open the hood, turn the isolator back on, and then get back in your truck or do whatever you're trying to do the winch. So trying to have the disconnect somewhere where the switch you're going to use to turn on and off close to you, or you don't have to get out and actually do it, is better. But since you have to have it as close to the battery as possible, the solenoid is probably the best bet. Also note, since some people don't get this idea, if you are installing this and you don't have a whole lot of room for this big old giant switch over here for the free spool, and it's hitting something or it's in the way, almost every winch, this one included, you can take the gearbox loose and turn it 90 degrees. You can turn it this way, front ways, or upside down, whatever you want to do. However you can best access this switch, because you're going to need to use that. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to pull your winch out. You don't want to have to reverse your winch to pull your line out. You should be free spooling to pull it out. And then once you get to the place, then you begin to, you switch it back to engaged, and then you'll start to pull your winch back in. The other thing to remember is that your rope should always spool from the bottom, which obviously it's going to be set up that way already. That's not really something you should be able to mess up, but you could if you really wanted to. It mainly would mess up if you're doing your pre-stretch or you pulled all the rope out to clean it, and then when you spooled it back in, it spooled backwards and it spooled onto the top, which you do not want. So you're going to want to make sure that it is spooled from the bottom, because that's how the winch is designed. More importantly, that's how the brakes are designed for it, and you don't want to lose the winch brakes in the middle of a long pole and have things slipping down the mountain or for the winch to burn up. So make sure that you're feeding the winch line from the bottom of the spool like it is here, so it's going this way and wrapping like this. Also, you'll notice, especially if you look at Open Roads website, and pretty much every one of them, there's going to have a cranking amp recommendation, how big your battery should be. And this one here specifically is 650 cranking amps, which is all three of their winches are rated at that. So my truck, as you see here, is a 650 or has a 650 cranking amp battery, which, to be honest, probably needs to go up depending on, so the next time I swap it out, I'll probably put something a little bit bigger in there. But I'm at the right rating at the moment. And as I said earlier, when you're pulling, this thing can draw up to 400 amps on a heavy pull. So you want to make sure you have a good battery before you head out into the wherever you're going. You do not want to find out your battery's almost dead out there when you're in the middle of trying to winch yourself out of something. Now, the other thing I want to say is that if you buy this winch, or any winch really, that has a wired controller and wireless, so it has both options, always take your wired controller with you. You can lose this. I mean, this one comes with two, but you could lose this. You could break it. You can drop it in the mud. You can drop it in the water. You could do about 1,000 things with one that's not tethered to something. Now, these do come with a little lanyard hole or mount, or whatever you want to call it here. So you could stick this on a lanyard on a carabiner and hook it to something so you don't lose it. But I would never go anywhere without being able to at least use this if necessary. Because if the battery died in one of these things and you didn't have a battery to replace it with, you'd be stuck. So always take your wired controller. Now, when it comes to choosing synthetic rope versus cable, it's really up to your use case. There's no real right or wrong and when it comes to that. Just know that with cable, it's stronger as far as being more resilient to abrasions. You can drag it over a log if you needed to. You can drag it across, rougher terrain. I wouldn't recommend it dragging it over rocks, but you could if you had to, and it will resist most of those abrasions, and it's strong enough to do that. It's also generally cheaper than synthetic to buy a winch that has cable as opposed to one that has synthetics. Now, the downside of cable is that it's a lot heavier, or it's heavy enough to make a difference between whether you choose to do this or not if you're really trying to dial down the weight on your rig. It's heavy. It's a lot heavier than synthetic rope by itself. It also can, when it does begin to fray, it has little, the little piece of the cable are what fray. And if you get one of those things in your little nicely moisturized hands, you're gonna know it. You need to always be wearing gloves when you're using cables for that reason, because if you drive one of those big pieces of cable through your hand, it's gonna suck. And you don't want to do that. The other thing is that, at least for most of them, there's memory involved. If you don't know what that means, essentially is that if the cable's wound up weird or wound up tight for a long time or stored in a weird way, you pull it out, it's going to have that kind of pigtail looking kind of coil to it until you pull it out straight, and it's going to want to bunch up. So when you're trying to use your snatch blocks and stuff like that, it can just be a pain. When it comes to that. So that's, here nor there, that's just the pros and cons of it. And synthetic rope is about opposite pros and cons. It's much lighter. It's much easier to handle and to deal with. It has no memory issues whatsoever. and it's generally very strong. It's definitely strong enough in the sense of pulling, and can even be stronger, I think, in some cases than cable. I might be wrong on that. But their downside is that it's not going to be, obviously, resistant to abrasions, and it's much easier to cut. I mean, you can cut a rope with a knife. You're not going to cut a cable with a knife at all. You'd probably need a pair of bolt cutters. Now that, I don't know what situation you need to cut a rope in. It might be a good or a plus or a minus, but that's just out there for you to understand. But synthetic rope is generally more expensive, and it's easier to fray. If you were to drag it across a rock, you're definitely going to fray it. You might even cut it, even if you go around a log or something like that. So it's just not the same. Now, there are ways to fix that and to put things down when it has to go across something, and there are solutions for that. But just know, generally speaking, your cable is going to be more resilient to cuts than your synthetic, but your synthetic is going to be easier to work with and lighter. And if you're putting on a trailer or a rollback or a wrecker or something that you plan to drag logs with or something like that, then you're going to want to go with cable. You know, something that's abrasion resistant and something that's tough that can just take a beating without a whole lot of fuss with it. And that, you know, if you're in that world, you know that cable is probably going to be your best bet. But if you have your weekend, you know, rig, or even your long haul overland rig as well, and you have tons of supplies and you're trying to count every pound worth of weight, then you're going to want to go with synthetic, because for the amount of weight it can pull, it's going to be much lighter than its cable alternative. Final thought on that though, if you do go with synthetic, you need to pre-stretch your synthetic line before you ever use it in a serious situation. And I'll make a video about how to do that, but there's already plenty of them out there. I'm sure you can find one without me having to show you, but I'll make one in the future just so you can see from my point of view. Now, you want to be taking care of your winch, you know, and cleaning it out. You don't want to just leave a bunch of crud in there, a bunch of dirt and those kind of things. Now, when it comes to maintenance, your synthetic line and rope are also going to have some differences. No matter what you have, you need to maintain your winch. You need to keep it clean, especially if you're in a super dusty or super muddy area and it's always covered with mud. You need to keep it clean, and you need to be cleaning the electrical contacts and stuff like that too, and probably adding some anti-corrosion or some terminal protectors or protectorant on that. Especially if you live up north, you're going to have, or anywhere where they use salt on the roads, this is going to be even more so. But your synthetic line is more sensitive to less maintenance than your cable is. Cable is more resilient in that case, and your synthetic line should be washed out with soapy water every so often, and to keep it clean and up to date and dried out and stuff like that. Now, your cable, you shouldn't just leave it caked with mud either. That's going to just damage everything in here, and you're not going to want to do that either. But cable is a little more resilient than synthetic. So if you're a lazy bugger, get cable, simply for the fact that you don't have to, you know, it's more forgiving when you don't want to do maintenance on it like you ought to do. The other thing to consider is that when you have the difference between synthetic and cable when it comes to the fairlead, the cable uses the traditional old style roller fairlead, which is pretty bulky in and of itself. There's, you know, rolling parts and stuff like that. You don't want to get your fingers stuck in there at all, which you shouldn't have your fingers near, you know, the mouth of the winch at all, no matter what. But the roller fairleads are just more bulky in my opinion, and they don't look as good, but function is still there. Then do that. But the synthetic fairlead is simply this. It's just this smooth piece of aluminum, because all it needs is the rope to just kind of be guided into the bottom of the spool. So it's a lot cleaner, a lot less weight. And I don't know how much less weight it is than a roller fairlead, but there's some less. Anyways, I'm sure there's some things I could have mentioned on there, but we'll see you on the next one. And if you would, go ahead and like, subscribe, and share this if you found that this info was of help to you in your off-roading career. And if you're in the Western North Carolina area, hit me up, let me know, and see if we can get out on the trails together. So that's that. Keep it clean. Keep it open, and remember, as always, adventure favors the bold. So get out there and do something you've never done before. We'll see you on the next one.